You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go. When the Iron Lady sings it, that means it's official. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the big show. For 15 years, we've been bringing you all the wonderful people, all the smartest minds, the brilliant authors, people who spend a lifetime learning their trade, their craft, telling their stories, building it out, learning, researching, all this stuff. And they bring it to you in this beautiful, concise, there's almost like should be a vase for it. Maybe the Chris Voss Show is the beautiful vase. I don't know. I'm pretty ugly, so it's one ugly Voss, probably. Get it? Voss, vase. I just made that up right now. Anyway, guys, welcome to the Chris Voss Show, the family that loves you but doesn't judge you as harshly as your mother-in-law. We're going to be talking with an amazing author today, and he is telling the story of unknown history. You know, over the years, we've had lots of great authors on who've been telling the story of the true story of our history and some of the things that were kind of hidden, or what some people call whitewashing of our American history, and telling the stories that have been the untold stories or hidden stories of our history that are some of the most important to tell, because they're some of the most important things that have changed the future of our country, impacted our country, et cetera, et cetera. In the meantime, before we get into that, we do demand, it's not a demand, people, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, and Goodreads, I'm sorry, we did that one. It's Monday morning, folks. Chris Voss won the ticket, talking in Chris Voss, facebook.com. We have the author of the newest book that's just come out, November 7th, 2023, called Invisible Generals, Rediscovering Family Legacy and a Quest to Honor America's First Black Generals. Doug Melville joins us on the show today. He's going to be talking about his amazing book, and he has some relations of these folks to tell us the deepest story that you can probably get from anyone close to it. Doug Melville is is one of the most innovative voices in corporate diversity, and currently splits his time between the United States and Switzerland. And he is the head of global diversity, equity, inclusion in the luxury industry. His first book came out, which tells his family story of America's first two black generals, a father and son, that was just released. And he is the global head of diversity, equity, inclusion for International Luxury Holding Company, and he sits on the Governance and Sustainability Committee. He is responsible for drafting the DEI vision, measuring and embedding metrics, and strategizing around DEI as a business solution. Welcome to the show. How are you, Doug?
Chris, how you doing today? How you doing? I'm actually live from Switzerland right now. How about that?
Live from Switzerland right now.
Am I your first guest from Switzerland or no?
I'm not sure, but can I wire you some money to put in a number to count for me? Oh, they don't do that.
Listen, no one will ever know the IRS is on people like sticky fingers out here. Don't try to be cute with
Don't try to skirt your taxes, folks. Don't do that. It's bad. And if you don't have enough money, I mean, it's just kind of a privilege to pay your taxes, really, when you think about it. So, Doug, give us a .com. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, so you could log on to dougmelville.com. As you said, this is my first book that I've authored. Instagram at Doug Melville, LinkedIn at Doug Melville, and then also you can just search for Invisible Generals. The title of the book, anywhere your books are sold, audio books, physical books, ebooks. So that's kind of the skinny on the .coms.
There you go, skinny.coms. You can find us at skinny.coms on OnlyFans. Invisible OnlyFans callback jokes. They're the best. Invisible Generals. Give us a 30,000 overview of what's inside.
So Invisible Generals is the untold story of America's first two black generals. They were a father and a son, And at the start of World War II, before they reached general status, of the 335,000 people in the military, there were the only 2 black officers.
Wow.
Who worked together as a team to help integrate the United States military, which is 75 years ago this year, and ultimately create and command the world famous Tuskegee Airmen. This is while they were in service. And the son went on to work for the Department of Transportation and helped lead the creation of the United States Air Marshal Program, commercial airport security, and the 55-mile-an-hour federal speed limit. So these men did so much for this country, but were treated as if they were invisible because of their race.
Wow.
That was the onus for me to tell this story, because when my dad shared it with me upon turning 80 years old and me inquiring, I felt that someone in the family and someone who had heard firsthand, because my dad was there his whole life, understand the story at a very personal level, needed to share that these military stories are about the military and the missions, but they're also about family, fathers and sons, and what people will do to sacrifice for their country.
There you go. And as I mentioned in the prior show, we've had a lot of great people on, like Eddie Glaude Jr. and other people who have talked about the whitewashing of history. And we've seen arguments of that recently in Florida. But these stories are important because they, I never realized at the time, but growing up looking at history, there's a lot of white people in my history class. And I'm white, so I can say that, I suppose. And over time, we've learned through movies and books like yours that there's a lot of untold stories, likely over prejudice, because they just got left out over prejudice. I think there's a reason these stories didn't happen. And I imagine now you couldn't look at the U.S. military and be, where would it be without black people, or the NBA for that matter, or sports. So what was the motivation behind why you wrote this book? I understand there was a movie involved.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say that the tapestry of America is made from all Americans. And I think we somewhat do ourselves an injustice when we divide everything in boxes, Asian history, Native American history, Black history. I mean, that's kind of how America is set up. But I think if we looked at all of it as the umbrella of American history, we would do ourselves a larger justice by looking at it as one totality of history, because everything is like your body. Yes, your leg hurts, but your arm could be affected. It's all connected and it's all affecting each other. So I think that's just the first point about why these stories are so important that we tell. The reference to the movie, and thank you for bringing that up, that was the onus and the spark that lit the flame for me. So we were in the year 2011. I'm currently working, not as an author or anything of that nature. I'm living my best life. And I get invited to a screening of a movie called Red Tails. And for your listeners or viewers that have seen it, it's about the black fighter pilots of World War II. Now, the patriarch of my family, Benjamin O. Davis Jr., was the centerpiece character of the movie. And he was played by an actor named Terrence Howard. Well, when Terrence Howard got on the screen, we all knew he was playing the commander. He looks exactly like Ben Davis Jr. And when he's addressed by a fellow soldier, he's addressed as Colonel Bullard. So I'm looking around the theater trying to figure out what's going on. And then afterwards, there's a party. And I keep asking people, what happened to the names? And they were saying, Doug, this is Hollywood. This is an amalgamation of characters. Doug, this isn't a documentary. Doug, you can't have half the characters real and half fake. Doug, you don't understand how Hollywood works. And I'm sitting here going, wait, did there just a whole screening for a movie for the families and then the names aren't included in the movie? Now, some were brought on as advisors, and there was all little ways people were brought in for their opinion. But to me, the names on the screen were the whole thing. I don't want to hear about all that other stuff. So I went home and I tell my dad, and I'm furious. And my dad says to me, Doug, if you think changing the names are bad, let me tell you the family story of the Invisible Generals and how at 7 years old, I went down to Tuskegee and I was raised there by Ben Jr. And I saw firsthand all the ways we were treated as if we were invisible, and how these men fought for their lives, and how they were the only 2 black officers, and the military was so conscious of them, and they got so much attention that we had to live in hiding. We couldn't do interviews. We couldn't go out and play. So my dad's telling me this story, and it's not really like a military story as he's telling it. It's just a family story of, hey, this is what we went through. But I left that meeting sparked to go on my own and research these 2 men and say, if they're left out of the movie, if my dad describes them like this, what really happened? And that sent me on a 10-year quest to discover my own family history and uncover the accomplishments of these 2 men.
And that's awesome. And now you've told it in a book. Yeah, you got to love it, man. The Tuskegee Airmen film by George Lucas. I'm surprised there wasn't a Death Star in it. They had to blow up.
It was one of his. It was actually became his last movie before he sold.
Oh, was it?
The organization to the Disney company. And people sometimes sometimes when I talk to people like, do you hate it? What do you hate Red Tails? And I say, no, I appreciate Red Tails for exactly what it did. Mm-hmm. It scaled the story around the world. It brought this unbelievable story to life. And that was a chapter. But my chapter is my family's contribution to that story as an additional next layer. So I look at everything as, history sometimes is looked at as back in the day, but we're all building off it. So I just looked at it as part of the next narrative of what we needed to do.
There you go. And it put you on a journey to learn your history. Tell us a little bit about you. How did you grow up? Had you delved in the family history in the military? Had you been exposed to any of it? Was that prevalent in your being raised?
No, not at all. I was 10 years younger than my brother and sister. So my parents, if you ever have a baby 10 years younger than your brother and sister, your parents are like, listen, you're going to have to fend for yourself and find food. And here's
you have to fend for yourself. Wow.
Yeah. But they were cool about it. And that was our whole vibe.
Sounds like very Gen X's.
Yeah.
That's how my parents were. Latchkey kids.
So, but every occasion, every Thanksgiving, every holiday, we would always go to Arlington, Virginia to visit Ben. Mm-hmm. And he was the center of our family. And as a kid, I didn't know really what was going on with this man. I just knew he always wore red. And he was the most loving, positive guy in the whole world. And all he ever wanted to talk about is, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? How can I help you get smarter? Education is everything. Character is everything. But it was a little over the top. It wasn't like a normal, older guy in the family where you're like, oh, this or that. He just kept going on with the same things. His house was all feng shui with Buddhas and waterfalls. And not anything about the military. But when we would go to Thanksgiving every year at Andrews Air Force Base, and everybody would always salute. And I would always say, Dad, what's going on with Ben? And he'd be like, oh, Doug, Ben, he fought for America. He was a general, so people salute him. Never said really anything about it. So in 1998, we all get invited to the White House. And President Clinton, at the time, after a 10-plus year campaign by Senator John McCain to get Ben Jr. his 4th star, in 1998, the number came up, and we were told that we were all invited to the White House, and on the day they light the Christmas tree, Ben Jr. was going to get his 4th star that he should have gotten in active duty in the 60s in 1998. And this is when I was like, wait, what? Like, what is going on? Because I'm there in the front row. I'm like, what is this? What did this man do? This is crazy.
Yeah.
And the night before we go to get the 4th star, there's a whole argument in the family because the government was willing to acknowledge that he deserved his 4th star, but we had to sign a piece of paper that the family wouldn't get compensated for it. So we would get the honor, but we would not be compensated for
the back pay or something.
For the back pay and everything. And this is over 30 years. So Ben's wife of 60 plus years doesn't go to the ceremony.
Wow.
So I knew something was going on, but this is the first time, and I'm in my 20s, this is the first time I'm really going, wait, what is really going on with the story? And that was really the first thing that sparked my interest. We get the 4th star, and then 4 years later, Ben Jr. passes away on the 4th of July, 2002.
Mm-hmm. Was he cool? Did he go and get a star? Was he there?
He went and got his star.
His wife wouldn't go.
And because he said, I've told my father that I was going to be a full 4-star general, and on this day I promised to, complete that honor. So he was going to go get the star, and that was something that was important to him, and actually important to the future, because if you're not a 4-star general, there's certain buildings that can't be named after you, and there's certain honors you can't receive. So ultimately, it was very important in our family story that he got the 4th star. But this is really the first time I knew what the man really did, because it just wasn't talked about in our house.
Wow. That's extraordinary. And so you find out, you go to the film, you find out that, history's been kind of whitewashed again. What's some of the research and tell us about some of the challenges that the generals went through? I mean, why were they picked as the first black generals? What was their role, or what was their, implied role? And then what did they actually do? I think we talked about this pre-show. And what were their, did they have the same sort of limitations as other generals?
Mm-hmm. So what I actually found was that my family story really began in the late 1800s with a guy named Lewis Davis. And Lewis Davis was born a servant, but was raised essentially hired out by a certain individual named General Logan, who you may know from Logan Airport in Boston, or Logan Circle or Square in Chicago and DC. General Logan brought this young boy in and raised him, and almost as a little bit of a son, even though that really wasn't how it was intended to be, but ultimately became a guiding light for this young man. And Logan's best friend was President Ulysses S. Grant. So during Grant's second inauguration, in the buggy on Pennsylvania Avenue was Grant, and then Lewis Davis with Grant's son on his knee, because he was the babysitter for Ulysses S. Grant. So The reason I bring this story up is because if it's not for this part of the story, they never get the signatures needed at the time to get Ben Davis Sr. into the military and get him elevated to officer.
Oh, wow.
So that was the very important turning point. In 1901, after being rejected from West Point because they didn't want to get in the habit of allowing blacks to enter, President McKinley signs a promotion to Ben Davis Sr., and he becomes in 1901 a black officer. Okay. This is so important. He becomes an officer. He joins the Buffalo Soldiers. He learns to be an equestrian. He's mentored by a gentleman named Charles Young, who was the only other black officer in the United States and a West Point grad. And Charles Young says, listen, we can get people through West Point that are black, but you almost have to train them from the time they're born. Almost like when you look at like LeBron James and his son, it's almost like you have to get these individuals ready from day one. Ben Sr. listens to Charles Young. He starts a family, has a wife, 3 kids. His wife dies during childbirth. And he brings his only son for a $5, which was a 1-week pay barnstorming plane ride. And his son comes down and goes, Daddy, I want to be a pilot.
He's hooked.
And this is where I would have said, son, it's time for ice cream. You know what I mean? I can't say I would have done, because the valor starts right now. But he said, I want to help you live your dream. Aviation was less than 20 years old. It was segregated. He goes, even the government can't turn down a West Point grad.
It's true.
So he trains his son for 10 years to get into West Point. His son gets into West Point. They get the one signature from the one black congressperson, Oscar DePriest. Wow. And then when they show up, they don't know he's black. So
is it because he's because the color is
because the color of his skin?
Wow.
He entered as a black cadet, obviously.
Yeah.
And they didn't know. So they give him a makeshift room. And on the second day, he runs down to a meeting in the Sinks, which is where everyone gathered. And the door was locked. And they said, we've accidentally let a black cadet in.
Oh, man.
We are to treat him as if he's invisible until he drops out.
Wow.
And
holy crap.
Went to school, Chris, 4 years.
4 years.
50 weeks a year. No human interaction at West Point.
Wow. That is crazy, man. And so they just try and force him out by ignoring him.
It can't happen. If you go to West Point now and ask anybody, they go, you cannot graduate here without a study buddy.
Wow. That is crazy, dude. And so so what does he do? He toughs it out, or he says, I don't know.
No, he toughs it out, and he gets to 4 years of school, never could eat at a table because it's segregated, and every time he had to ask for permission, he wasn't granted.
Holy shit.
He went to the Army-Navy game at Yankee Stadium in a segregated bus.
Wow.
He failed classes like ballroom dancing and CPR and boxing because no one would partner with him.
Mm-hmm.
And after all this time goes by, Chris, he's still in the top third of his class. And a few months before he graduates, they say, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to fly airplanes. And they said, you can't. The policy doesn't allow it. And he goes, but I did it. I graduated in the top third. That was the assignment.
Holy
and
crap.
They said, why don't we pay you to go and start a law firm and honorably discharge you? And he said, no, I want to be a pilot. He graduates in the summer of 1936. And when he shakes his dad's hand in the graduation photo, they are in that photo, the only two black officers in the United States. So his dad became an officer in 1901. The next officer that was black was his son in 1936.
Wow.
So this is what made me say, I have to go into the story. And it was a turning point because in 2015, after setting a Google alert after watching the movie, because that was the first thing I did, 2012, 13, 14 come by, 15 hits, the Google alert goes off. West Point is looking to name their biggest $100 million barracks building in the middle of campus after one of their greatest grads. And there was 3 names on the docket: William Westmoreland, Norman Schwarzkopf, and Ben Davis. So I replied to the Google alert, go online, get the email addresses, go up to West Point, and I tell them the story just like I tell you and say, you have to consider him as the name. And all of them couldn't even believe it.
Wow.
And they then gave me their historian to look into the research and opened up their archives. And then they started getting more interested in the story. And then we all realized no one actually knew the real story.
Wow.
You know, it was there, but it was gerrymandered, is what I call the gerrymandering of history. It's there, but you got one file over here, one photo over here, one thing in this museum, one knowledge in the presidential library, some from friends, some from family.
Wow.
And it takes family, really, to me, has to put this together. It's just hard to do it as a historian because the connection's just not there. It's hot and cold at times. People don't want to talk. People don't want to say what happened. You know, there's trauma. There's, all the things. So for me, that was the steps that I went through and got us to where we are today.
There you go. So these guys finally, I get accepted in the military, and they're generals. But how does that role play out? What sort of other prejudices they run into and limitations?
Well, the thing is that they started as officers, and then the military wouldn't allow blacks to be in charge of whites. Wow. So in a 100% segregated military, the father, Ben Sr., only worked with segregation his whole career. And then 75 years ago this year, he worked with President Truman to write the integration plan for the United States of America. So his big accomplishment was becoming a general and also working with Truman to write the integration plan. The trick there was 6 days before Truman introduces Executive Order 9981, he asks Ben Davis Sr. to retire, so his name was not included on any of the documents. Mm-hmm. So that was a big blow for Ben Sr. And that's when Ben Jr., his son, was there, and he said, Dad, I will redeem us, and I will make sure that going forward, I go to heights, literally and figuratively, that you couldn't go in your career. And that's when he became a 1, 2, and 3-star general. He was commander of the Tuskegee Airmen. But in 1967, when he was supposed to get his 4-star from President LBJ had made a decision that he had done enough for Black Americans, from Thurgood Marshall being promoted to the Supreme Court to executing against Martin Luther King's plan for integration and civil rights, that he wasn't going to get any political benefit. So he denies Ben Jr. his 4th star.
Jesus.
And Ben Jr. can't get a job in private aviation. There's very few Black pilots. He couldn't work for the post office or FedEx or anything. So the government creates a job for him to help with public commercial aviation. And the first thing he says is, we need to make commercial aviation as efficient as military aviation. And he goes on to create commercial airport security. There was only 2 airports in the U.S. that had a scanner and x-ray. So he said this needs to be a global and domestic system. He created the United States Air Marshal Program and trained 4,000 men to go undercover on commercial flights.
Wow.
And those 2 things were so successful that the Carter administration brought him back to help do that for traditional transportation. And then he led the creation of the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I tell this story because it seems impossible that we would never have heard of this man or his dad.
I know who to blame now for all the speeding tickets I got when I was young with my being.
And they hated him, by the way, Chris. They hated him.
The 55-mile-an-hour
thing. He got bad press.
There you go. Thanks to Jack from LinkedIn, Jack Raymondson. A great story, sir. True resolve. What a family story. You know, this is the interesting story. These young men have this goal to become part of the U.S. military, to fly, to become successful, but the amount of walls that are built in front of them, the amount of prejudice they have to overcome, the amount of oppression they have to overcome, limitations, and some people would give up, just go, okay, well, you know, obviously you don't want me here, you know, West Point, et cetera, et cetera. But the resolve that they took to stick it out, to fight through, to realize that they could change the world. You know, there's one of my favorite quotes by my hero, Bobby Kennedy, is each of us can send forth, can change the world, can impact the world, basically, and send forth a tide that changes everything. It's the, I forget the name of the thing, but it's the Ripple of Hope speech in South Africa that he gives. And each of us can send forth ripples of hope that can change the mightiest of things. So this is a great story you get into. You tell the story of your family, you tell the story that's been hidden all these years. And what do you hope people come away from when they read this story?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you read the book, you'll see there's so many layers to it. But I think a great way to kind of close it for the viewers and the readers and the listeners is really around one key thing. Number one, you must tell your family story. You must write it down. You must talk to the people on the couch that may or not be slothing. You must get people to communicate. Okay, this is very important. Number one. Number two is you must be present to our veteran community.
Yes.
There's so many veterans out here that did things after work, after working in the public sector, and that have changed the world. And we just don't know these stories and who they are. And I think once you do those 2 steps, for me personally, the 3rd step is use the system to diffuse the system. If you uncover evidence, facts, information where you feel you have to continue the generational elevation that your family started, because a lot of times now, Chris, we don't look at our family as starting the journey. You think you're born and you'd be like, I am this, and it's like, but your family did many things for generations past to get you here today. So I think just knowing that is a big part of it. But then once you know that, what are you going to do about it? Because that's what my dad told me. And that's when I switched my career to become a diversity officer. But also I switched my mindset to say, you can't fix something and complain about something at the same time.
That's true. That's true. You've got to be accountable.
Use the system. And then once you start getting involved in systems, then you get a voice, then you get a vote, then you can change policy. But the last thing for the reader or the listener is time. The impossible takes time, but in time you can accomplish the impossible. These things are not going to change overnight. But if you put a commitment to it, like you commit to watching every episode of Game of Thrones, or knowing every joke from Seinfeld, or reciting every line from Friends, people know a lot of different things. Every video game, every plane serial number, seating configurations and Greyhound buses. People just know random and interesting things. But what I want to tell people is take that time to learn your family and take that time to take inventory of what people did to get you where you are. And hopefully you can uncover your own invisible generals and help inspire you or your children to a better future.
There you go. What a great vision, inspirational message. There's a few shirts and coffee cups lines you just
They're all yours. They're all yours.
So as we go out, imagine, it's hard to imagine a segregated military nowadays. In fact, we've got military generals in the White House and everything. I remember how hard the Trump administration tried to fight. I forget the general. It wasn't General Milley. It was, who's the general now? He's the head of the military.
CQ Brown is the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah.
And you have the Secretary of Defense. They're both military men, both people of color. So CQ Brown actually was an Air Force pilot. So he's been so amazing to our family and worked so hard. And 2019, the United States Air Force Academy renamed their airfield Davis Airfield.
Wow.
And General Brown was so important to that. And then West Point ended up naming that barracks in 2017. So to me, the irony of these two men is that the largest installation at the Air Force Academy and West Point are both named after the same person. Yet many people still don't know who this man is.
Wow. And it's glad that you're here to tell the story of him and put it down in the history book. So now that's a great thing about a book. It's like it's out there forever. So I mean, it's hard to imagine, these people pioneering, going through this hell of trying to just, live a normal life as a human being that everyone else is doing, and going through all the oppression and stuff. I imagine just what they have done to change the legacies in the future of our American military, the contributions of veterans and military soldiers. Is just extraordinary.
Yeah, I think one thing about the segregated military is that the Tuskegee Airmen was 15,000 men and women, about 1,000 pilots, and 14,000 ground crew and support staff. But to me, what was crazy about when I was going through the research and learning more is that you had a man in his late 20s who had never commanded anybody, is now in charge of 15,000 people during a war. And because the military was 100% segregated, the airplane parts from white planes couldn't be used on black planes.
What the hell?
The wrenches used to fix white planes could not be used on black planes. So when they gave the black pilots all the worst planes, but then couldn't get the parts, they decided to give them the best planes with the new parts and the new planes, and that was the P-51. The issue was the maps were segregated. So when Ben Jr. was getting maps of where the Allied forces were located in the European theater, many maps did not have his military base on it. And he told the men, so we don't get bombed by our own guys, I would like you, before our longest mission on 4th of July weekend, 1944, to paint the tails red so they know we're Americans. And that was the birth of the Red Tails. So the story it's just so unbelievable that, and this is why when we go back to the movie where you started,
the Red
where
Tail
I
movie.
say, why was I upset that the name was changed? This story to me is the story.
Yeah.
There is no Tuskegee Airmen without this story, because someone had to get it started and command it.
Yeah.
Unless we really take a minute to understand that part, the other part is equally as important, but this part cannot be omitted.
Yeah. And these are the stories that altered the history of this country. Inevitably, the greatest contributions as well. The people that put their lives on the line for this country, we need more recognition and need more appreciation, especially in today's world. We've had lots of authors on the show that talk about, the high suicide rates of veterans and the fallout of veterans, the homelessness and stuff. It's something we really need to fix. These people put their lives on the line. And fought like hell. So there you go. Give us a final pitch out to readers to pick up the book and order it wherever fine books are sold, and wherever they want to find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah. So if you want to find out more about me, I'm at Doug Melville, or Instagram Doug Melville, or LinkedIn the same. And my final pitch to readers is, the second half of the book is How to Become a Visible General, a step-by-step guide on how you can uncover your own family story, your own veteran story. And even if you never served and you were in a veteran family like I was, there's a rich history in your couch, in your living room, that is not talking. Before it's too late, before time passes through us, please take that moment to understand their story, because if this story was invisible, who knows what other stories are out there? And it's our responsibility to know that these individuals work in the public sector and their stories are public domain. So if a reporter calls you or a photographer calls you and they write it down or photograph it, they own it. So at a minimum, you need to own your own story, take control of your own legacy, build your own narrative, and then start being the person that realizes you are a continuation of what your family started, and it doesn't begin with you.
There you go. So inspiring, Doug. People in the comment section are so inspired. So glad I tuned in. Serendipity. Thank you both. People just loved your story, Doug. Give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yep. DougMelville.com and Instagram at Doug Melville will be good.
There you go. Thank you very much, Doug, for coming on. What an inspiring story this morning for people, and people should pick up your book.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate your time as well, sir. Order up the book wherever fine books are sold. Invisible Generals, Rediscovering the Family Legacy and Quest to Honor America's First Black Generals. Familiarize yourself, guys, with the stories of history. The one thing man can learn from his history, as I always say, is that man never learns from his history, and thereby he goes round and round. We need to, the importance of history is mastering it is important to understanding our future and changing it. So there you go. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss. Subscribe to the big LinkedIn newsletter, the 130,000 LinkedIn group over there. Also go to Chris Voss 1 on the Tickety Talkety and ChrisVossFacebook.com. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.